in the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. This series is part of the producer-led grant program at DATCAP. I'm Rachel Rushman, and I manage the producer-led program. This summer and fall, we're going to have 2 tracks for the webinar. One is going to be on planting green, and then one is on rotational grazing. The idea is to follow 4 farms throughout the growing season to look at different management strategies throughout the summer and fall. Whoops, and now there we go. And how they vary on different farms with different soils and different farming systems. So a little bit different approach than we were previously doing. So today we will be covering planting green with Derek and Dwayne Ducat and Brian Gunderson, who will be joined by Barry Buboltz and Chad Sampson. And then we will check back in with them again on November 9th to see how things are going with the planting green system. So future webinar dates will be posted in the chat, and they're also available on our webpage, as well as the links to register. So just a couple quick housekeeping things before we get started with the interview part. I had sent out a producer-led programming survey. So this is for people who directly participate in the producer-led program. So you're a part of one of the producer-led projects. That survey is intended to get feedback on not only our internal programming, but also ideas for our producer-led workshop and the Wisconsin Cover Crop Conference. So please do fill that out if that applies to you. Also, for people on the phone, if you do need to unmute or mute yourself, that's *6. Also, feel free to type your questions in the chat. We're going to open up for Q&A after each presenter for a few questions, but then we'll have more time at the end too. So I just want to say thanks to all of our speakers, our farmers and agronomists and county staff that helped put this together, our UW Division of Extension staff, Michelle Probst and Whitney Presby, who helped with hosting this webinar series, and then also for producing the videos that are part of this webinar. And then I also want to thank Dana Crystal, who had a huge part in developing this webinar track. So I'm going to hand it off to her to explain more details about the topics for today, and then introduce our speakers. And Dana is our conservation specialist at DATCAP, specifically for the producer-led program. So with that, I'll pass it off to you, Dana.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So if you want to go to the next slide, Michelle. Okay, so you're seeing a map of where our 2 different farms for today are located. So as Rachel mentioned, we'll be working with Derek Ducat from Deer Run Dairy, and there'll be a discussion between him and Barry Buboltz from NRCS. And then Gunderson Grain Farms will be talking with Brian Gunderson and Chad Sampson from Racine County. So with both of these farms, I was able to go out and visit them May 11th and May 12th to take a look at some fields that they had planted green earlier that year, and talk to them a little bit about their fertility and weed management strategies and some of these other elements of early season management of the planting green system. So changing up the order a little bit, so bear with us with some of the slide changes, but we're going to start out with Brian Gunderson. Brian Gunderson's family farm owns and runs 1,300 acres and rents an additional 800 acres. He's been a no-tiller for a long time, over 30 years, and has planted 1,600 acres of crops in the last year. And he is a member of the Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County. So we're going to first start with a video that was taken earlier this May, as mentioned. So we'll get started with that, and then we'll hand it over to Brian and Chad for the rest of that discussion.
So we're with Brian Gunderson of the Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County, and we're standing in a field that was planted to corn recently, and we're going to have Brian explain where the field was in the fall and what he's changed in his operation and what he plans on doing this year.
this field was soybeans, planted green in a cover, some of the best beans I ever grew. So I did it again. This is corn planted into a cover. We've been running the same planter setup as we have for no-till. It's got row cleaners on it, but the row cleaners don't mess with the standing cover. Everything works planting green or planting no-till. We've always been on the higher end of nitrogen at planting time. We use about 20 gallons of 32% at planting with some in-furrow. This had in-furrow. This had 2 gallons of 28 in-furrow and 2 gallons of 624-6. So there's some fertility here, more than maybe a lot of people do, but we've always done that for the no-till. 4 years ago, I did 50 acres. 3 years ago, 200 acres. 2 years ago would have been over 1,000, and this year I'm at 1,600. We'll probably terminate this in the next few days. This will have Roundup, dicamba, and triple flex. That shouldn't be a problem for the next cover crop. We'll spray that, and then when we can row this corn, we'll come back and side dress it. I'm really thinking the covers that could be the last herbicide pass, a one pass herbicide pass, because when this rye melts down, falls down, it's going to be shading the ground. Everything I learned along the way, every single thing has come true. These guys that have done this, everything they said, and I told myself, well, I don't think I'll be doing that. I'm doing what they said. So it's real. It works. It's a bit nerve-wracking, but it takes a little more management, a little different style. But I actually love it. I can't see not planting green and not using cover crops. I realized I always thought it was the above ground plant that maybe would hold ground stable, but in reality, it's the glues from the roots that hold the ground stable. That first year I had kind of thinner rye in a spot where you would have soil loss every year, and there was no soil loss. And it was due to the glues from the roots in the soil, not the above ground. I mean, the above ground certainly don't hurt, but when I saw that and I saw that crop, it convinced me. They all said to me that because I was a established no-tiller, this was going to be so easy and easier to no-till. It actually is. My yields have gone up on soybeans, certainly. So I'm looking forward to a healthier soil, and my soil tests are showing me that. And I can see that. I can physically see that by digging soil. So it's a win-win-win. I would reach out to one of the guys in these multiple of producer-led groups, because they are willing to share the story and help you along the way. And I think what you got to do is just commit a field, or you got to be willing to do it and try, and because it is possible.
All right, great. So with that, I think we'll kick it over to Ryan and Chad down in Racine County.
Do we wait for questions, or just
Yeah,
tell the
well,
story again?
yeah, well, if you all wanted to talk, Brian, if you want to talk a little bit more about maybe how planting green on your farm has evolved since you first started. You know, is there anything that you've changed over the years, whether that's seeding date or fertilizer management or anything like that? You've kind of arrived at your management where you are today.
Well, I would say about every few days or weekly or monthly, things change. you change what you've learned, you change by, you could ask me something today and next week I'm going to do something a little different, but you got to be ready for change. Change happens often with this deal.
Yeah, and so one of the benefits I think that we're highlighting two different farms, and we'll hear from Derek Ducat in a little bit, but one of the benefits is just that, you've got some different soil types than what he's working with up there, being in the Kewaunee County area. So can you talk about maybe some of the special considerations, whether that be advantages or disadvantages to some of farming some of those sandy loams down by you as it relates to planting green?
I guess the only thing I'm learning, we have a multiple of soil types. The only thing I really don't know about is soil type is the river bottom ground or the really wet ground, marsh ground. I don't know how the covers are going to fit into them. Some of them seem to hold maybe too much moisture. That's something to learn.
All right, and you're cutting out just a little bit, Brian. So maybe if you can scooch maybe just a little bit closer to the.
Okay. Yeah, I said the river bottom ground or marsh ground. Some of that is I don't know what I'm doing there yet with the cover. Some of that holds a little bit too much moisture, but otherwise the rest of the ground is variable from sandy rock to clay to nice loam soils. I would say the covers work on all that. The only one is that river bottom, real wet type soil that I'm not sure about yet how we do that with covers correctly.
Sure, and
maybe thinner covers would be better. Thick covers in the wet soil is tough.
makes sense. And so can you also talk a little bit more, Brian? So we'll hear from a dairy in a little bit here, but you've got a large cash grain system. So can you talk just more broadly how planting green fits into the rest of your grain system?
They all said it would be a little easier to no-till. I believe that's true. In a normal year, in the past couple of years here, we've been extremely wet. I had quite a little prevent plant. But otherwise, on a normal rainfall deal, the covers are great. I love them. And I'm not far enough along into it. I see it happening. I'm going to be able to farm a little wetter soil if the soil health is there. The ground is a little more forgivable, more like a potting soil that you would buy in a bag. It's converting to like a non-crusting type soil that you can plant into it a little moister than I could no-tilling.
Sure. And so so it's June 8th now. That video took place in the middle of May. So what kind of weed considerations or what are you thinking about now in terms of managing weeds? Is that residue mat providing nice weed management for you? What are some sort of other considerations you're making now at this date?
I just covered all these acres, side dressing them. The covers are really holding down the weeds, but we are in extreme drought right now in this corner of the state. So we don't have a lot of weed pressure, but I have about zero weed pressure with the covers. So I'm absolutely sure right now, if we do get some rain in the next week or two, that my herbicide deal is over with. I won't have to spray. I'm pretty sure of that. So I got away pretty cost effectively on these planted green fields. A lot less weed pressure.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay, so I think what we'll do, just to keep this moving, we'll move over to Derek and Barry. And then at the end, we'll open it up for more of a for question and answer and more of a discussion between the two different farms. So again, moving
Hey,
to
Dana.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. There was just a question from Tanya in the chat there about, are you, Brian, are you using exclusively rye as your cover?
I would like to do a better job at this, mainly rye, but I've got some clovers, vetch. A lot of it wasn't strategically put where I was supposed to put it. I planted quite a few soybeans into prevent plant ground that had covers on it with vetch and clovers. At the time when I planted them, I intended to plant corn, ended up going to beans, but no, I do have some multi-species. Because of my prevent plant, a lot of that was multi-species, but it ended up going to beans. I thought strategically I should put the corn on bean stubble with covers, but that open ground last year got planted to multi-species, but went to soybeans. I'm really not taking advantage of that. I should have thought about it a little more, but I wanted to get a multi-species out, and I had the opportunity to do it on that prevent plant ground.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so then next I'd just like to introduce Derek Duquette's farm. So Dwayne and Derek have a 1,600 cow dairy. They currently farm about 2,500 acres. They've been farming in that area since 1983 and have been doing a variety of different conservation practices. And they're also members of the Dorky Demonstration Farm Network. So we'll that video that we took on the 11th, and then we'll kick it over to and Derek for discussion.
Morning, we're out here at Deer Run Dairy here in southern Kewaunee County, and we're with Derek Duquette here as we're starting to plant this field green into standing rye. And so, Derek, you want to tell us a little bit about the field and how this was set up last fall with the planting?
Yeah, so after we harvested the corn silage off of here, we no-till with a no-till drill. We no-tilled in about 25 pounds of rye, and then we did application of manure probably about 3 weeks later. I think this was planted probably first week of October. This is one of our later fields that we did. We have hydraulic downforce and we have roll cruiser closing wheels. It just depends. Usually the ground, when we no-till in a rye is pretty mellow, but there are occasions where we need to use a little more downforce just to make sure we keep the seed depth consistent. And we found with the furrow cruisers, there's a lot of different ones out there that'll do a decent job, but the smooth roll usually isn't quite enough in the no-till, with the conditions when you got a decent amount of rye on the field. So that's why we went with the furrow cruisers. We planted in the rye that was headed out already, and with the row cleaners, they just kind of shifted off to the side enough so that when the disc openers come through, most of that's moved out of the way, and if we see any hairpinning, it may be in the top 1/4 inch, but we're usually planting about 2 to 2 1/4 inches deep, so we never really get any residue down by the seed. We usually do 2 applications of manure, whether they're both in fall or one in spring and fall, but we did find that usually in the early season we add more nitrogen just because the rye is holding a lot of it. So the rye is kind of used as our late season nitrogen. So we're putting anywhere from 7.5 gallons to 10 gallons of 28% or 32% down. And then we will come back early for our side dress, usually, 4 inches tall. And we like to get our side dress nitrogen on early. And then we kind of rely on the breakdown of the rye for our late season nitrogen. We did a surface application with a dribble bar, and we've been able to last fall, we were actually getting closer to 10,000 gallons, just with the conditions, and the rye had grown a little bit more, in the fall of 20 than what we seen in 18 and 19. So we were actually able to bump our rate probably about 3,000 gallons from the previous years. So we're able to get it down to 2 applications to get the amount that's needed versus the 3 to 4, in 18 and 19. But we were struggling with so much rain that we were only allowed to put 5 to 6, to have it stay. I would say just be open-minded. Like everybody, we were a little skeptical when we started on how much we wanted to jump in, and we've done a lot of trials, and through the demo farms, there's a lot of trials going on, to help other people be more comfortable when they get into how much they want to do. We have another farm that we do custom work for, and since we've been doing this for the last 4 to 5 years, he trusted us, and he went like 80% into rye cover crops without hesitation, just because he kind of seen how it's working for us. And we've been learning a few tweaks here, but it's actually a little more forgiving than what we thought it was going to be.
From a soil health standpoint, I mean, having all this biomass here, our soil health is improving, and I think you can attest to that. But at the same time, the water quality benefits that we have here along the lake.
Yeah, and we've noticed a lot less erosion in spring, but also we get a lot more work done in fall. And the spring load is a lot less this year, just because we're basically just doing the planter. We don't have the tillage and the stone picking and all that. And then also once it's planted, if we get one of these 3-inch rains, I'm not very concerned about erosion and washouts that we had to be fixing the last previous years. So.
All right. Yeah, and I'll have to apologize for the windiness there on that video. It's a very raw and windy day, and Derek's farm is very close to Lake Michigan, so it's very authentic videoing. Okay, so now we'll talk with Derek and Barry, and they'll kind of offer that perspective of the system on some heavier soil types and having to work more into the system. And then I think they also have some update pictures of what that field looks like later. And then they're also going to talk a little bit about, they took some biomass as well. So we'll kick it over to Barry and Derek.
Yes, thanks, Dana. Yeah, like you mentioned, how the temperatures changed in the last 3 weeks. It was a very cold day and raw day, like you mentioned. And so, Derek, just kind of getting into a few of the details here on your system. You want to share with the group, and I see you got your father there, Dwayne, also. Just how the acreage for planting green, how you guys have increased from year to year?
Sure. So we've been, probably planting green for about 4 years. We started out probably 10% of our corn acres, that first year, trying a couple different things. And, we've moved up to probably about 80% of our acres planting green. That's corn and now our alfalfa stands. We had a little bit of a hiccup in 19, just being that it was so wet. We tried to get covers in, we tried to broadcast. We had some success, but not to the extent that we've had, the fall of 2020 and this spring. So it's been moving forward really, really well, and it's good to see a year where we finally get some real good results after 18 and 19 being so wet and such a struggle.
So when you're setting your fields up, last fall, what's your planting rate? You're predominantly using, rye after your corn silage, but how much are you planting out there, or does it depend on the time of the fall?
I guess we've been kind of cut back from original. I think when we started, you know, we were around that 40 to 50 pounds putting it in with a drill, and we realized that was way more than what we needed. You know, being that if you plant with a no-till drill, we've been about 25 to 30 pounds now and see pretty good results with that. We have broadcast a little later in the year and probably go up to, you know, the 40 to 50 pounds then, depending on how we feel, you know, the timing and the pre-tillage and how that all goes. But the majority of our acres get drilled in right after we're done chopping corn. So, and as far as some of the multi-species crops, you know, where they're planted a little earlier, we still try and use our drill to get them in the ground so that when we do get some moisture or a manure application, we can get them coming out of the ground right away, and have pretty good success with low rates of, you know, low rates of pounds per acre.
Yeah, I think most people looking at the screen with the rye that's you know, being shown there would probably question whether that's 20, 25, 30 pounds, but it's fairly safe to say that manure amplifies the effect of the rye out there. And so as we talk about manure, how are you fitting manure into your system?
So we've been able to fit it in. I guess it was a little more of a challenge when we first started, and just to have it accepted, you know, just to stop application and stuff. And then we had 2 wet falls, 18 and 19, where some fields were messed up, and you know, and being that there was so much moisture out there already, and we got all this extra moisture to get rid of, we were doing, you know, up to 4 applications on some of our lighter soil, but, you know, we were limited to, you know, 5,000 gallons, some of those applications, just to keep it where we were applying it. And the other thing, being a later fall, we didn't have a whole lot of growth on the rye, so there wasn't a whole lot there to help along with that. Whereas this past, you know, fall, being that it was drier, we were able to get planted earlier, you know, chopping happened earlier and quicker. So then we were doing 2 passes closer to about 10,000 gallons, and, you know, saving on some of the setups and some of the extra that goes along with each pass. So yeah, last year was pretty good. And you know, some fields we did 1 in fall, and we saved, you know, the second pass for spring. And with the rye being just a little shorter than what this was here in the picture, we were still able to do, you know, 10, 11,000 gallons on quite a few acres, and it worked really good. It stayed right there.
In the past, have you guys utilized putting or applying manure after the corn is planted?
Yes, we have done some application, you know, with a splash pan after we had corn planted. Some of it was after corn was out of the ground, you know, about 2 inches. We've seen some pretty good results. It was also in those wetter years, so that's why we were trying to get some manure out at a little bit drier time during the year after we got it planted. And there was a few spots where we seen where the tractor had driven, you know, kind of slowed the corn up, you know, in them wheel tracks. I think with the dribble bar also, that would have probably helped us a little bit more than just a splash pan. But being how good the fall of 20 was in this spring, we had no need to get any more manure out after it was planted.
So moving on to like planter setup, any special changes that you've made to that planter that we saw in the video? Can you, I guess, expand a little bit on your closing wheel system that you found most effective?
Sure. So we've used a few different closing wheels, which, you know, we've had pretty good success with them, but we've kind of moved to the furrow cruisers just because we have a high-speed planter. They seem to hold up a little bit better. They're a little lighter than some of the other ones that are out there, the Dawns and that. But I don't think that a smooth wheel will get the job done, but the Furrow Cruiser maybe isn't the most aggressive, spike closing or spoke, wheel, but we're experimenting with it with the Dawns for multiple years, and it was always keeping up and doing as good of a job. So we switched 2 years ago. We also went to pneumatic downforce, which makes it a little easier to adjust from the cab. And I think it reacts a little bit faster than the standard spring pressure closing system. So when we bought a new planter, we added that on, and then we went to hydraulic downforce, which I don't know is necessary, but we definitely can track traffic patterns and stuff in the field where we can see the gauge wheel margin and some of that. So there are benefits, but we found that the ground tends to be really mellow. Planting into rye, it reminds me a lot of no-tilling into soybean ground. The next year where that ground was just mellow and forgiving, versus trying to no-till into some of our hay fields and back, if you're no-tilling corn on corn. So
this this rye that we see on the screen, I guess, in my opinion, is probably the perfect height, that 18, 20-inch rye. But I mean, in years past, you've no-tilled into some rye that's a lot taller, a lot more mature, and maybe even for some of your custom customers, I guess. Are you seeing issues with hairpinning? We always, we hear people that are concerned about that. If you could talk about that, if that's been a concern.
No, we don't see a lot of issues with hairpinning, but we have moved to spraying after we plant. When we originally started, we had sprayed everything and terminated it before we started to plant. And we ran into some issues where all of a sudden it would rain and then we couldn't get it planted. And the taller the rye was, if that case or scenario happened, that rye would turn to straw, and then it liked to wrap all over the planter, and the closing wheels weren't working, or the openers weren't working as good to move it to the side. So we basically went to 100% planting green, planting it first, so that the rye that's there is it's just more tender and forgiving, and we can plant into it headed out, as long as it's green. Without hairpinning issues at all, really, that I see. The only thing I guess we noticed last fall, where we did have some that was headed out, in fall, some of it was still standing. Didn't really affect the Kemper head on the chopper, but I did notice some was starting to build up on some of the row dividers, but it never stopped us, I guess.
So the screen the photos that you're seeing on the screen now are a field that's just on the other side of the woods from the previous video. And so this field had been planted, I believe, Derek, maybe a day or two prior to May 11th. I can't remember the exact date, but nonetheless, through the Dora Kiwani demonstration farms, we were able to take some biomass sampling out there. And so some of the results from that, utilizing a lab, we were, a ton, 1.8 ton of dry matter out there on this field. And I guess the other aspect that kind of caught my attention is the carbon and nitrogen ratio of this cover crop, and this is all rye, was down at that 14 to 15. And so that tells us that it's some pretty lush stuff. While it's probably tied up a fair amount of nutrients, the return from that cover is going to be sooner to the soil profile than it would be if we were no-tilling into rye that was more mature, such as 2 years ago in 19 when we were in a very wet environment. And so through the Door Kiwani demonstration farms, we're going to continue to look at some soil health tests that are ongoing on these fields. We're taking these a number of times through the year. And so at the end of the year, we're hoping to have a better picture of some of the improvements in these fields. I guess I don't want to really leave Dwayne off the hook there, not being able to talk. And so I was wondering, Dwayne, if you kind of wanted to give, your insight on what you think one of the, the biggest advantages for the change we've seen here in the last couple of years with this no-tiller planting green.
Well, like Derek said earlier, a big advantage is we're not tilling the ground and we don't have to deal with, picking stones, delaying things. You can just get out there when the conditions are right and plant. It's definitely a cost saving factor when you don't have to run the tillage equipment over the ground. Other than planting, what we did see in the wet falls is that the equipment carried much better in the fields that were no-tilled into a cover crop versus fields that were tilled. It was just night and day difference there for carrying the equipment, major benefit. And some of those fields that were rooted up, it takes a few years to get past that. And, in these fields that carried so well, you don't have that problem. That's the main things I see with this system right here. Other than and building the soil health is a great thing. We have not gone to where we have eliminated herbicides, but there were times when we were questioning, do we really need to spray this field? So that's the kind of the direction we're trying to head to, I think, eventually.
So we're getting kind of close on our time to move into questions and answers, but one last thing I wanted to hit on is, Derek, you did mention a little bit about planting green and no-tilling other crops. And so I wanted maybe to see if you could just briefly talk about your no-tilling of alfalfa, because I think that's an opportunity that maybe other farmers would be interested in too.
Yeah, so we've been, about 3 years now. We started no-tilling our alfalfa into either a multi-species or just a cover crop, just cereal rye, which the first year that's what we did, it was into, rye that was planted 40 some pounds to the acre. So there was a lot of rye there, and it was probably over 2 feet tall. And we were, to say the least, nervous, but it came through, and it's been one of our better stands for that seeding year. And so the next year we moved onto a real heavy red clay field, and same thing, other than it was a multi-species blend there, and had very good results too. We had to make sure we let the ground be ready. We got out a little too early and tried to plant, and it was a little too sticky, and we waited a week and got out there, and that new seeding caught right up to anything that we had tilled and planted that, if we'd planted previous to that. So it's been, and so far it's really clean, clean hay fields. We do a blend of red clover and some meadow fescue grasses. So we really don't have the option of spraying to clean up our alfalfa fields. But we haven't, the ones that we no-tilled seem to be some of the cleanest, new seedings that we've planted. So.
Well, thanks. I guess we're at our time where we're going to send it back over to Rachel. I think she has the question and answer segment.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Barry and Derek and Dwayne. This question is for all of you, but maybe Derek and Dwayne, since you were just talking, we'll have you go first. There's two questions related to the profitability of the practice of the planting green, and then any additional costs from the seed planting and herbicide, or looking at some of the cost savings from such like less tillage passes. So could you talk a little bit about what you've seen as far as costs and then savings, and then any profitability you've seen from the practice?
Well, from a cost standpoint, generally you're looking at two passes of tillage without the no tilling. So you're probably looking at close to $30 an acre cost savings in tillage there. And as far as in the end, we haven't seen any reduction in yield, sometimes an increase in yield from fields that were no-tilled versus fields that were done conventionally.
Yeah, and I would say we're also saving, our nutrients that we apply in fall. I believe we're seeing a lot more of them staying where they belong for the next season. Where in the past, with the manure application and stuff, I think we were losing nitrogen, and it's a little hard to track, but it's definitely noticeable.
Okay, great, thanks. And then Brian, do you have things to add on that?
Well, I don't know, on the cost savings, I don't put a lot of numbers towards it. The way I look at it is I couldn't be growing a crop any cheaper than what I am. I learned this even in the no-till, being 30 plus years of no-tilling, without working that ground, without losing the carbon to tillage. We're getting away with a lot less fertilizer. My nitrogen is under a pound of nitrogen per bushel. So my system, I just run with it. It works. I make money. Can't really give you a number, but there's no one producing corn cheaper than I am.
And then Brian, have you seen it with impacting yield at all with utilizing this practice?
My beans, certainly last year I saw the best beans I've ever combined, a lot of 100 bushel beans. By no means that was an average, but I've seen spots before do 100 bushel, but I'm seeing big areas of a field do 100 bushel beans. So, and all you got to do is look at the soil to see why that increases. The soil's it's better, it's nicer, and my soil tests show that. So.
Okay, great. If you do have any questions at this point, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or you can type them in the chat too, and I can read them out for you. In the meantime, and I'm sorry if you already mentioned this, Derek and Dwayne, but did you talk about how it's impacted yield at all?
I guess we haven't seen any negative impact. I do believe that there's more positive. We've been on some lighter ground that I think would have been stressed out a few more times during the year if we wouldn't have planted green and had that residue there early. This year I'm hoping that's what we're going to see too here, where we that ground is covered now because we're in a pretty good dry spell here too. And even later in the season, on some really light ground, we had some really good yields after a 3-week dry spell that we were kind of worried that really would have affected the yield, and it didn't seem to. It was some of our best corn. And then also, I think in 18 to 19, by using up some of that moisture and being able to get out there and plant. You know, it probably bumped our yield, you know, if we'd have been comparing it to an identical field that we tilled and did conventionally, so.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then, let's see. Okay, so this is from Mark Riedel, and this would be to the farmers. So looking at some of the participation, I guess, here on this webinar, do you have any suggestions or recommendations for how we could get more farmer participation in this type of work or help grow the farmer-led approach?
One of the things that we have are conservation conversation meetings where local farmers or farmers from anywhere can come and see what we're doing. And, you know, we have them once a month. That's a way of maybe somebody coming out and seeing what's going on with the demo farms here in Kewaunee County. That maybe could turn some heads and they might accept it a little easier if they see it firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. And then Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, for myself, and I'll take this even to being a no-tiller prior to the covers. No-till or no-till covers on a cash grain farm are not the most attractive looking field. They're not the luscious looking field. It's really deceiving. The return on it is really surprising, and the neighbors don't really get that. I probably haven't promoted it very good in the past. Being a no-tiller, you're competitive with your other farmers, but now it feels right this time in my life to get involved in this and help other farmers. But we were able to acquire some land through a lease with our county that we're going to have a watershed farm, and hopefully we'll get some better participation of people coming, seeing what we're doing there. We do have a lot of shop meetings at my farm, and we got a pretty good core group of 10, 12 guys that are into this practice now. But we have quite a few naysayers that just don't even want to come listen, and I don't know how to get through to them, or maybe our watershed farm will help in that matter. And with that watershed farm, our idea is to bring in our area FFA kids, maybe even some graded school kids. This farm actually is located where a county park is. It's well used, and we've got some pollinators out there. We're gonna try to get the public involved in this to see the things we're doing, and maybe they're landowners too, and maybe they'll request that some of these practices are done on their farm. That's about all we can think of how to promote this.
Brian, Brian is exactly right there with the way the fields look, because when some of this corn is coming through the rye early on, it looks really spindly for a while. It's like, oh boy, it's not very pretty to start with, but it comes through that with blazing guns after. So I get the point where it doesn't look nice.
Yeah, just an added comment on that is we've had a lot more people planting green up here in Northeast Wisconsin this last year. And so between myself and another agronomist or two, it's, you know, trying to help people get started planting green, but then after it's planted, it almost turns into a counseling role because people get worried the way the corn looks, and it's just patience, hang in there, and it's going to even out, and you're going to be really surprised. And when Brian says that, you know, the results are deceiving, I think that's a great way to state it. So.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for those comments. Brian and Derek, Dwayne and Barry. And we did have a comment too. We have Dean from down in Illinois is joining us and mentioned that some farmers down there in the Chicago area make the comment that, you know, they can't make it that far, make it work that far north. So hopefully some of the comments that you just shared address that a little bit, Dean. We did have one last question here that we'll close out with. And Brian, I know we had talked about this a little bit last week. This was something that you were dealing with, but wanted to open it up to everyone here. If you can comment on, you know, if you've noticed, you know, we obviously had that frost in late May, and certain trends that you maybe noticed in your planted green fields versus not. And if you're thinking that had to do with planting date or perhaps soil moisture, or maybe just some general observations to share.
Well, I've had a good week of evaluating this. I did have to replant 560 acres of soybeans. 120 of that was for slugs. The slug field was a 2-year prevent plant ground that I grew tremendous biomass on it and laid down. I've got a 2-inch mat of biomass there. The ground is beautiful. The biology of the soil is beautiful, and so are my slugs. So I just replanted some of that for the 3rd time. You know, so it's a victim of, it's a circumstance of doing a great job for the soil. I thought I had plenty of predators. You know, they always talk slugs on a wet, cloudy year, but I gave them an environment that I think they're even worse in this warm, dry year, because for them to stay hydrated, they're eating twice as much. So that's one problem. The frost also played into, because my soybeans were planted on prevent plant ground behind the cover. I had more ground cover there, which didn't let the heat come up from the soil, which I believe happened. But we had a circumstance with being so dry. We had, I don't know, some guys are referring it to like a weather inversion, frost inversion. But I've got some plants living in a marsh, and you can go 30 feet higher on the elevation, and I still got plants dead. And in between, I got plants alive. The cold followed swales up the hill, killed the top of the hill. Covers played into a little bit, but if I was no-tilling, it'd be very, very similar. I still believe in this. I'm still going to go forward. I think this is a 1 in 25-year event, 30-year event. I can't let this stop me, but it's been a frustrating week. I just finished yesterday. A lot of driving a Ranger over every field, and I mean traveling about every 100 linear feet. I'm moving over, and some fields I just totally replanted. Some I spotted in, but along with, you know, covers, residue, it's hard to see the beans, so you gotta cover every acre and then try to remember where you're gonna go plant. And very frustrating week, but I don't know, hopefully learn something by it and move on.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Brian, and apologies that you had to get out and plant tonight. That's such a frustrating week. Dwayne and Derek, what about up in your neck of the woods?
So, you know, we definitely had some frost in a few places. Not to a big extent, but we're pretty close to the lake. I think that had some effect on a few areas. I guess the one thing that, the only thing that we could really correlate with the covers versus tilled ground or spots was probably where we drove over the rye with the planting tractor. There was a little bit more damage that was noticeable there, so it must have did a similar thing where it blanketed the ground and held the heat down from, being able to protect that. But in the areas in between where, we leave the rye standing, it really wasn't noticeable. And then we also no-tilled into about 150 acres of alfalfa, which our alfalfa is alfalfa grass mix. And we noticed probably the worst spots of frost were we had thick grass areas in some lower spots where we had touched them up, in years past with all the wet springs. We've seen the worst amount of damage right through those grassy areas, but it wasn't really justifiable to even go back in and replant. So we're not talking to the extent of, of other farmers, so.
Gotcha. Is that kind of what you were seeing too, Barry? Or I guess in some of the fields you've been walking?
Yeah, just across some of the other demonstration farms, not everybody dealt with frost, but it was surprising how sporadic or scattered it was. Like Derek said, one of the other fields that I noticed on another farm that was, side by side with conventional and planted green into rye was an alfalfa field where it was no-tilled into alfalfa. And I think that both these guys hit it on the mark where, where we had a thicker mat of dead residue. It really kept that heat from escaping. So we saw a little bit more frost damage there, but where that corn was nestled into that rye that was still standing, that was able to help it through that better.
I could add a little bit to that too. I had just sprayed these bean fields the week prior to the frost, the week of the frost. So they had the stress of the drought, stress of the spray, and then the stress of the frost. And that made a difference. So that compounded the problem. Now our corn, I think our corn fared better in the covers. I didn't have to replant no corn where there's enough replanting of corn going on. So there it was protected a little bit. The cold got in there, but it didn't get as far to kill it. Some of the work around the cold got into the ground and killed the corn. So there's a good and bad. It is what it is. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing your observations on that. It does seem like it's very site specific and even microsite specific. So, well, we've reached the 1 o'clock mark, so we don't want to keep it all any later, but big thank you to all of our presenters today. And thank you, Michelle and Extension, for helping Rachel and I out with organizing this videos. We will be posting these online, so we'll send out a link to those in case you want to share them with others. And we'll share separate video links to the videos as well, because sometimes that kind of comes through a little funky over Zoom. So with that, yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and be sure to join us on July 13th for the first episode of the rotational grazing webinar. So thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.